I didn't know my life could be split cleanly in two by a finger. Not a scream, not a slap, not a fight. Just my mother, in her bathrobe, standing in our entryway while two police officers waited, calm as if she was answering a door-to-door survey. "She drove," Mom said, pointing at me. "She came home drunk." The words hit like cold water. I remember the way the porch light made the officers' badges shine. I remember my own mouth opening, then closing, because my brain couldn't catch up fast enough to form a sentence that sounded believable. "Mom, no," I managed. My voice cracked, thin and desperate. Arthur was driving. He was speeding. He hit someone and he didn't stop. Behind her shoulder, my stepbrother Arthur stared at the floor like it might open and swallow him. He wouldn't look at me. He wouldn't even blink. One of the officers raised his hand, not unkindly, but final. "Ma'am, we'll need you to come with us for questioning." My mother didn't flinch. She didn't reach for me. She didn't do the thing mothers do in movies. Step between their child and danger, even if they're wrong. She just stood there while metal closed around my wrists. The handcuffs were colder than I expected. As they walked me outside, I twisted back toward the doorway, searching her face for the moment she'd break, for the moment she'd say, "Wait, I lied. I can't do this." She didn't. She watched. 3 days later, sitting on a jail mattress that smelled like bleach and old sweat, I kept hearing her voice in my head, steady, convinced, almost bored. She drove. And even when the truth finally came out, when my aunt's recording dragged my mother's confession into the daylight, when the charges against me collapsed, when the town's whispers switched directions like a flock of birds, I realized something worse than jail time. My mother had looked at me and decided I was disposable. I thought that was the deepest betrayal a person could survive. Then, 5 years later, my husband moved 4 hours away and told me I couldn't stay at his place. And when I showed up anyway, the door opened to a woman wearing his shirt, smiling like she'd already won. "Ah," she said softly, eyes widening. "You must be his wife." If you had asked me before all of this who my safe place was, I would have answered 2 names without thinking. My husband, Clark, and, embarrassingly, painfully, my best friend, Kelly. That's the part that still makes my throat tighten when I say it out loud, like my body is trying to protect me from remembering the exact moment I trusted the wrong people. I'm 26. I've always been the kind of woman who builds her life with lists and timelines. Not because I'm controlling, because I'm terrified of chaos. I lost my parents young, and the world taught me early that stability isn't something you're handed. It's something you claw together with both hands. So I did. I went back to school. I worked and studied and made myself useful in rooms where I felt small. I told myself that if I just stayed steady, if I stayed loyal, life would eventually reward me with something simple and safe. Clark felt like that reward. I met him the way people meet in normal stories. Nothing dramatic, nothing cinematic. A mutual friend introduced us at a small get-together. He was the guy who offered to take out the trash without being asked, who remembered people's coffee orders, who didn't dominate conversations but somehow still felt like the center of the room. When he started paying attention to me, it felt flattering. Not in a shallow way, in a maybe I'm not invisible anymore way. He pursued me gently, patiently. He didn't rush. He didn't play games. And after what I'd survived growing up, after years of being the strong one by default, that steadiness felt like love. We dated. We built routines. We got married young, but it didn't feel reckless. It felt like choosing peace on purpose. Kelly came into my life around that same era. We met through work, and she was magnetic in the way some women are. Loud laugh, sharp wit, always with a story. She was the friend who texted first, who dragged you out of your apartment when you wanted to disappear, who made you feel included. When she went through her divorce last year, I showed up for her. I brought food. I helped her move boxes. I listened to her cry on my couch until her mascara stained my throw pillow. I didn't keep score because I didn't want to be the kind of friend who keeps score. Clark liked her too. At least that's what I told myself. They joked easily. They had similar humor. Sometimes I'd catch them talking while I was in another room, and instead of feeling alarmed, I felt relieved. Like, good. My husband and my best friend get along. That's healthy. 4 years into our marriage, Clark got offered a job in another city, about 4 hours away. The pay was better. The role sounded like growth, and we weren't exactly swimming in extra money. We were in that stage where adult life is one long balancing act. Rent, tuition, groceries. Maybe we can take a trip next year, and Please don't let the car make that sound again. The problem was me. I was 1 year away from finishing my degree. I couldn't transfer without losing credits. I couldn't drop out without throwing away everything I'd fought for. So when Clark sat at our kitchen table, fingers laced, and said, "This could change everything for us," I did what I always do. I swallowed my fear and tried to be practical. "We'll make it work," I told him. "Long distance is hard, but it's temporary." Clark kissed my forehead like I'd just given him permission to breathe. "I'll come back often," he promised. "We'll FaceTime every day. You can visit whenever you want." And at first, he did. We video called almost nightly. He'd angle the camera so I could see his face, and I'd tell myself the ache in my chest was normal. That missing your spouse means you love them. I visited him twice in the first few months, but every single time when I said, "I'll just stay at your place," he had an excuse ready, smooth, rehearsed, almost too quick. Strict visitor policies, no overnight guests. Neighbors complain, too small. I booked hotels, I paid for Airbnbs. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself I was being supportive. And I didn't realize those excuses weren't obstacles. They were walls, built on purpose. The first crack didn't come with a fight. It came with grief. In March, my uncle died. Saying that out loud still feels wrong, like I'm naming something that shouldn't exist anymore. He wasn't just family. He was the person who stepped in when the world decided to take too much from me too early. After my parents passed, he was the one who taught me how to file taxes, how to change a tire, how to sit with pain without letting it hollow you out completely. A heart attack. Sudden. No warning. One day he was there. The next day, the house felt too big and too quiet, like it was holding its breath. I stopped functioning. Not in a dramatic way, in the slow, frightening way that feels invisible from the outside. I missed classes. I slept in my clothes. I forgot to eat. Grief pressed down on me so heavily that even brushing my teeth felt like a negotiation. After a week of this, I called Clark. I didn't rehearse what I was going to say. I just let it spill out. The tears, the shaking, the simple truth that I was not okay. "Can you come stay with me for a few days?" I asked. I need you." There was a pause on the line, long enough for my stomach to tighten. "I can't," he said finally. His voice was careful. "Ryan just moved here for college. I promised my parents I'd help him get settled. Apartments, registration, the city, it's a lot. They'd be really disappointed if I left him right now." I stared at the wall while he talked, nodding like he could see me. "How long?" I asked. "Maybe 2 weeks," he said, "just until everything's sorted." 2 weeks felt like a lifetime, but I told myself I was being unreasonable. People have responsibilities. People can't drop everything, even for their wives. So I hung up and cried harder. Later that night, I called Kelly. I needed comfort. Validation. Someone to say, "Of course you're hurting. Anyone would be." Instead, she snapped. "You're being selfish," she said sharply. "Clark is being a good brother. You're really jealous of a 20-year-old right now?" Her words landed like slaps. "I'm not jealous," I whispered. "I'm grieving." "You're overreacting," she said. "People die. You can't expect your husband to stop his life every time something bad happens." I remember sitting on my kitchen floor after that call ended, phone still pressed to my ear, feeling smaller than I had in years. Something about her reaction felt off, too aggressive, too personal. But grief has a way of dulling instincts. I told myself I was just sensitive. A month passed. I dragged myself back into routine. I caught up on classes. I cooked real meals again. The pain didn't disappear. It just became something I carried instead of something that carried me. Clark kept calling, kept texting, but the warmth felt thinner, less present, like he was always half distracted. "And Kelly?" She stopped checking in. "No, how are you holding up? No, did you eat today?" I told myself people get busy. I told myself not to read into it. Then in May, I decided to surprise Clark. Not because I was suspicious, because I missed my husband. I took a day off, packed a small bag, drove 4 hours with the windows down, rehearsing the look on his face when he'd open the door and see me standing there. I had never been to his apartment. He always met me somewhere else. This time I found the address in our shared insurance documents. When I pulled up, my heart sank immediately. There was no security desk, no special entry system, just a regular apartment building. I walked inside and checked the mailboxes. Apartment 43. My chest felt tight as I rode the elevator up. I knocked. No answer. I knocked again. And when the door finally opened, it wasn't Clark standing there. It was a woman in his shirt. Messy hair, sleep-soft eyes. She looked at me, took me in from head to toe, and then smiled like realization had finally clicked. "Oh," she said, "you must be his wife." And in that moment, everything I had been ignoring finally screamed. For a second, I honestly thought I was dreaming. Not the hazy kind of dream, but the kind where your brain panics and tries to protect you by bending reality into something less lethal. The woman stepped aside before I could say anything, like this was her apartment, like she had every right to make space for me inside. I walked in without asking. The air smelled familiar. Clark's soap, the citrusy one he always bought in bulk, but mixed with it was something else. Floral, sweet, not mine. The apartment wasn't messy. It wasn't temporary. It was lived in. 2 coats hung by the door. One of them wasn't his. A pair of women's shoes sat neatly underneath. Framed photos lined the wall. Clark laughing, Clark hiking, Clark with her. Not a guest, not a visitor. A life. My hands started shaking so hard I had to press them against the kitchen counter. That's my shirt, I said finally, my voice barely audible. The woman turned, glanced down at herself, then back at me. Oh, she said again, softer this time. I didn't realize. That's when recognition hit. The tilt of her head, the cadence of her voice. Kelly, my friend Kelly, the one who'd told me I was selfish for needing my husband during grief. The one who'd scolded me like a child for wanting comfort. She stared at me now, like she'd just been caught stealing something she didn't think belonged to anyone. I sank into one of the kitchen chairs because my legs stopped working. We didn't speak for a long time. Then, an hour later, the front door opened. Clark froze when he saw me. Not surprise, not relief. Panic. The kind that drains all color from a face. "Why are you here?" he blurted out, then immediately flinched, like he'd said the wrong line in the wrong scene. I stood. "You tell me," I said. My voice sounded foreign, steady, controlled, dangerous in its calm. He stammered. Kelly hovered by the window, arms crossed, eyes darting between us. Clark tried to explain. He said Kelly had been struggling financially after her divorce. He said he was just helping her out. He said it wasn't what it looked like. I asked him how long she'd been just helping. He broke. Months. It had started shortly after he moved. Kelly had come to help him settle in. One night turned into another. Comfort turned into intimacy. Intimacy turned into a routine. "She doesn't mean anything," he said quickly, stepping toward me. "You're my wife. I love you." I laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it was absurd. "Then why couldn't I stay here?" I asked. He didn't answer. I turned to Kelly. "You knew," I said. "All those times I cried to you. All those nights you told me I was overreacting. You knew." Her jaw tightened. "I didn't plan it like this," she muttered. That sentence detonated something inside me. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I just walked into the bedroom and started gathering my things. A jacket, a charger, the toothbrush I'd tossed into my bag that morning like an idiot. Clark grabbed my wrist as I passed him. "Please," he said, "don't leave like this." I pulled free. The drive home blurred. I had to pull over halfway and sleep in a motel because my hands wouldn't stop shaking. 2 weeks passed. Clark flooded me with packages. Jewelry, books, clothes I'd once pointed out in store windows. Letters apologizing, begging, blaming me for giving up on us. Then came the news. I was pregnant. The doctor's voice was calm, clinical. She mentioned risks, monitoring, precautions. I called Clark. Kelly was there. When I told him, Kelly screamed in the background. "She has no right," she shrieked. "That's my man's baby." Her family started texting me, calling me a homewrecker, accusing me of trapping him. And that's when Clark's younger brother finally told me the truth. This wasn't an accident. This was planned. And the man I married hadn't just betrayed me. He had orchestrated my erasure. Shock doesn't look the way people imagine it does. There was no screaming, no dramatic collapse, just a quiet, hollow feeling, like someone had scooped everything out of my chest and left an echo behind. I sat on the edge of my bed staring at the wall while my phone buzzed endlessly beside me. Messages from Kelly's family, missed calls from Clark, notifications stacked so high they blurred together into noise. Homewrecker, liar, you planned this. I kept thinking, how did I become the villain in a story where I never even knew I was competing? When the anger finally came, it wasn't explosive. It was slow, surgical. It moved through me like a checklist. First, reality. I was pregnant, high risk, with a man who had been living a double life, and a woman who believed she had ownership over him, and now over my body. I tried to tell myself to focus on the baby, on my health, on breathing. But the betrayal replayed itself anyway, in intrusive flashes. Kelly's voice calling me selfish, Clark's hand on my wrist, the way the apartment had smelled like him and her mixed together, impossible to separate. I kept asking myself the same question on a loop. What did I miss? Every late-night video call that felt rushed. Every excuse about his apartment. Every time Kelly redirected my pain back at me, framing it as immaturity or jealousy. I wasn't stupid. I was trusting. And that realization hurt almost as much as the affair itself. I called Clark again 2 days later, not to reconcile, but to establish boundaries. I needed clarity, if nothing else. He sounded relieved when he answered. I'll fix this, he promised immediately. We can move, start over, pretend none of this happened. Pretend. Like my grief, like my humiliation, like the pregnancy growing inside me. I'm filing for divorce, I said quietly. There was a sharp inhale on the other end. You're breaking your vows, he shot back. You're walking away. I almost laughed again. You broke them first, I said. I'm just acknowledging it. He started crying then, apologizing, blaming stress, blaming distance, blaming Kelly, blaming himself. Not once did he say, I chose this. That night, I started boxing up the gifts he'd sent. I didn't open them. I taped the boxes shut and stacked them by the door. Donation pile. Control felt like oxygen. Then, 3 days later, my body betrayed me too. I woke up with pain so sharp it stole my breath. Blood soaked through my clothes before I even understood what was happening. I collapsed on my bathroom floor, vision tunneling, hands shaking so badly I could barely dial emergency services. I remember unlocking the door. Then nothing. When I woke up in the hospital, tubes in my arms, and a dull ache everywhere, Clark was sitting beside my bed. He'd followed the ambulance. I'm your husband, he'd told the staff. Seeing him there cracked something open in me all over again. I told him to leave. He refused. For 3 days, he stayed, bringing fruit, fixing my blankets, talking about our future like it was still a shared thing. One night, a nurse slipped me a note. If you need security, ask for grapes. I cried after she left. Kelly sent messages during this time too. Vile ones. Racist. Cruel. Celebrating my pain. I blocked her. I couldn't block Clark yet, not until I found the strength. The final moment came when he started talking about trying for another baby. Something inside me snapped cleanly in two. I asked for grapes. Security escorted him out. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I slept. Silence should have felt like relief. Instead, it felt dangerous, like the moment after a storm when the air goes unnaturally still and you know something else is coming. Clark didn't disappear after security removed him from my hospital room. He changed tactics. When I got home a few days later, weak, bruised from IVs, still dizzy from blood loss, there were flowers waiting outside my door, not inside. He knew better now. A card was tucked into the bouquet, written in the careful, apologetic handwriting I'd once found endearing. I just want to make sure you're safe. I threw the flowers away. Then came emails. Then handwritten letters again, slipped into my mailbox like quiet invasions. He wrote about memories, about trips we'd taken, about the way I laughed when I was nervous, about how nothing like this had ever happened to him before. As if novelty excused devastation. I blocked one number. He got another. My lawyer confirmed what I already felt in my bones. This wasn't remorse. This was control. He couldn't stand the idea that I was choosing a future that didn't include him. Meanwhile, Kelly's family escalated in the opposite direction. The messages turned coordinated. Same accusations. Same language. Like a script had been passed around. You seduced a married man. You trapped him with a baby. You ruined a good woman's life. I stopped reading after the first few lines. I blocked them all, one by one, my thumb steady, my heart racing with each tap. Cutting them off felt like closing a door on a room full of poison. But the damage was already done. I jumped every time my phone buzzed. I checked the hallway camera before opening my door. I slept with the lights on for the first week home, the echo of hospital alarms still ringing in my ears. Maria, one of my classmates, noticed the bags under my eyes and insisted on staying with me. She slept on my couch without being asked twice, stocked my fridge, sat quietly with me when talking felt impossible. Her presence reminded me that not all support comes with conditions. Then Ryan visited. Clark's younger brother stood in my doorway holding flowers, his expression tight and serious. I'm not here for him, he said immediately. I just wanted to check on you. He didn't defend Clark. He didn't explain. He didn't minimize. That alone made me trust him. We talked about neutral things. Classes, his new campus, the weather. Normality as a lifeline. As he was leaving, he paused. For what it's worth, he said, looking back at me, none of this feels right. And I'm sorry you're the one paying for it. Later that same day, Clark showed up again. This time he was angry. He accused me of throwing away our marriage, of being unforgiving, of punishing him for a mistake. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary, I said, my voice shaking despite myself. You built a life with someone else. He left in a fury, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the frame. That night, my lawyer called. Clark was contesting the divorce. He wasn't trying to reconcile anymore. He was trying to delay, keep me tethered. Then, 2 days later, I received a letter that changed everything. It was from Kelly's brother. He apologized for the harassment, for believing her, for not questioning things sooner. Then he told me the truth. Kelly had been obsessed with Clark for years, long before I ever met him. She'd befriended me on purpose, inserted herself slowly, patiently, waiting. She'd planted doubts, twisted words, undermined me in private conversations I'd never been part of. The job opportunity? Not random. Kelly had connections. She helped make it happen. Distance wasn't collateral damage. It was strategy. The letter included screenshots, messages, timelines. Proof. I forwarded everything to my lawyer with hands that barely trembled this time. Then came the final twist. Kelly was telling people she was pregnant with Clark's baby. Her brother didn't believe it. Neither did I. 2 days later, Clark used a new number to contact me. He begged to meet, said he had important information. I refused. He showed up anyway. Sat in my building lobby for 6 hours. Eventually, I agreed to 5 minutes, with security present. He looked destroyed. He told me Kelly was claiming to be pregnant, that she was lying, that he needed my help to prove it. I showed him the letter. He read it silently, hands shaking. When he looked up, he was crying. I believed her, he said. I ruined everything. I felt something close to pity, but not enough to stay. I accept your apology, I told him, but this is over. He finally agreed to sign the divorce papers. When he left, the air felt lighter. For the first time, the chaos stopped chasing me. People think the darkest moment is the betrayal. It isn't. The darkest moment is the silence after everything stops exploding. When you're finally alone with the wreckage and there's no adrenaline left to hold you upright. After Clark agreed to sign the divorce papers, I expected relief. What I got instead was emptiness. No messages, no confrontations, no crisis demanding immediate action. Just me, in my apartment, surrounded by boxes of things I hadn't opened and memories I didn't know where to put. My body was still healing, but my mind felt like it was running a marathon in place. Every quiet hour invited flashbacks I hadn't given permission to enter. Kelly's smile at the door, Clark's panic, the hospital ceiling, the nurse's note hidden in her palm. I would wake up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, convinced someone was standing outside my door. I checked the locks repeatedly, even when I knew they were secure. Grief doesn't ask for logic. I blamed myself in ways that embarrassed me. If I had pushed harder about staying at his apartment, if I had trusted my discomfort with Kelly sooner, if I hadn't been so focused on being understanding. I replayed conversations, editing my responses in my head like I could retroactively fix them. But the truth, the one I kept circling without landing on, was harder to swallow. I had loved honestly in a world where honesty wasn't being offered in return. That wasn't stupidity. That was courage. It just didn't feel like it yet. One afternoon, while sorting through paperwork, I found the ultrasound appointment card I'd never made it to. The edges were bent from being shoved into my wallet, then forgotten. I sat on the floor and cried until my chest hurt. Not just for the baby, for the version of myself who still believed love was a place you could rest. For the future I had imagined in quiet moments, the ones I'd never spoken out loud because I didn't want to tempt fate. I almost texted Clark that day, not to reconcile. Just to say, do you know what you took from me? But I didn't, because I knew the answer. He didn't take it. He chose himself over us. And I couldn't afford to keep handing him power over my healing. The darkness peaked, the night I finally slept without lights on. It should have been a victory. Instead, I dreamed of doors opening that shouldn't. I woke up sobbing, breath hitching, convinced I was still trapped in someone else's lie. The next morning, I made a decision, not dramatic, not grand, but deliberate. I stopped waiting to feel ready. I packed the rest of Clark's unopened gifts and scheduled a donation pickup. I blocked every unknown number that came through. I asked my lawyer to enforce no contact strictly. And for the first time, I said the truth out loud. To myself, to Maria, to the quiet room. I was manipulated. Saying it didn't absolve me. It freed me. Because manipulation only works when you assume malice would announce itself. It doesn't. It smiles, it comforts, it calls itself friendship and love. That night, I sat by my window watching the city lights blink on, one by one. And somewhere in that stillness, something shifted. Not strength, not closure, but resolve. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need apologies. I needed my life back, and I was finally ready to take it. The turning point didn't arrive with fireworks. It came quietly, through paperwork, signatures, and a single, steady realization that settled into my bones like gravity. My lawyer emailed me early one morning. Subject line, next steps. Inside were updates I'd been bracing for but no longer feared. Clark had officially withdrawn his objections. The divorce would proceed uncontested. Estimated finalization, 2 months. I stared at the screen for a long time, waiting for the familiar spike of anxiety. It didn't come. Instead, I felt space. Room to think, room to breathe, room to decide what came after survival. That afternoon, I took a walk for the first time without checking over my shoulder every few steps. I noticed things I'd ignored for weeks. The warmth of the sun, the smell of coffee drifting from a nearby cafe, the simple miracle of being unafraid in my own body. On my way back, my phone buzzed. It was Ryan. He didn't ask about Clark. He didn't push. He just asked if I was feeling better physically. Then, gently, he told me something that sealed the last crack in my doubt. Kelly's pregnancy wasn't real. She'd announced it loudly, dramatically. Then, quietly, claimed a miscarriage without ever showing proof she'd been pregnant in the first place. Her family had finally started questioning the patterns, the lies, the constant crises. For the first time, the narrative I'd been fighting against collapsed under its own weight. I hadn't imagined the manipulation. I hadn't overreacted. I had been targeted. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a notebook and wrote down every decision I'd been postponing while waiting for the world to stabilize. Move apartments, finish my degree, take the job offer out of state. They weren't escape plans. They were commitments to myself. A week later, I signed a lease in a different part of town. Smaller, quieter. Mine. I didn't bring much from the old place, just clothes, books, and a few kitchen items. I left behind the couch where I'd cried, the bed where I'd waited for messages that never meant what I thought they did. Starting fresh wasn't about erasing memory. It was about choosing what deserved to come with me. Clark sent one final message through his lawyer, a formal apology. No excuses, no requests. I read it once, then archived it. Forgiveness, I realized, doesn't require proximity. The divorce finalized quietly. No court drama, no last-minute pleas. Just paperwork. When I signed the final document, my hand didn't shake. I expected grief. What I felt instead was clarity. My marriage hadn't ended when I walked out of that apartment. It had ended the moment he chose deception over honesty, and then asked me to live inside the consequences alone. In the weeks that followed, my life began to resemble something ordinary again. I cooked real meals. I laughed, unexpectedly, genuinely. I slept through the night more often than not. There were still moments of ache, still flashes of anger, but they no longer defined the shape of my days. One evening, as I packed the last box for my upcoming move, I caught my reflection in the mirror. Thinner, tired, but present. "I'm still here," I said aloud. And for the first time since this all began, I believed it. The fallout didn't come all at once. It arrived in fragments, through whispers, forwarded messages, quiet confessions from people who had once been loud in their judgment. Kelly's story unraveled first. The same relatives who had bombarded me with accusations went silent, then awkward. One by one, a few reached out, not to apologize directly, but to explain. They said they hadn't known the full story, that they'd believed what they were told, that Kelly had been struggling and emotional. I didn't respond. Understanding isn't accountability. Kelly herself disappeared from my life the way she'd entered it, strategically. No more messages. No more posts hinting at victimhood. According to Ryan, she'd started dating someone new within weeks, already reshaping the narrative for a fresh audience. I hoped briefly that she'd learned something. Then I stopped caring. Clark's collapse was quieter but heavier. Once the divorce finalized, the structure he'd built to keep me orbiting him vanished. No legal leverage, no emotional access, no audience. He lost friends, not because I demanded it, but because truth has a way of making people uncomfortable around liars. Mutual friends stopped inviting him places. Co-workers treated him with polite distance. The man who'd once been so carefully likable found himself alone with the consequences of his own decisions. He respected the no-contact order. That was the last gift he ever gave me. Ryan stayed in touch, never pushing, never prying, just a human connection that didn't demand performance or forgiveness. It reminded me that fallout doesn't destroy everything indiscriminately. Some things survive. Maria became family in the way trauma sometimes forges unexpectedly. She celebrated small milestones with me. First full week without panic attacks, first night sleeping uninterrupted, first laugh that didn't feel forced. When I told her I'd accepted a job out of state, she hugged me so tightly I had to remind her to breathe. I knew you'd rebuild, she said. I just didn't know how fast. The move itself felt symbolic. A new city, new apartment, new routines that didn't carry echoes of betrayal. I walked through unfamiliar streets with a sense of anonymity that felt like freedom rather than loss. Back where I'd lived before, the story had settled into a cautionary tale people whispered about. Clark, the husband who cheated. Kelly, the friend who crossed every line. My name stopped coming up entirely, and that was exactly how I wanted it. One evening, months after everything ended, I received a final update through Ryan. Kelly's family no longer spoke to her the way they used to. The pregnancy lie had fractured trust beyond repair. People who once defended her now kept their distance. She wasn't facing legal consequences, but she was facing reality. Clark had transferred departments at work, started over socially. According to Ryan, he'd finally stopped blaming everyone else and started asking himself the right questions. Too late to matter to me. I listened without emotion. Their outcomes were no longer my responsibility. The true fallout, the part that mattered, was internal. I stopped apologizing for boundaries. I stopped explaining my choices to people who hadn't earned context. I stopped confusing empathy with self-sacrifice. I didn't win in a dramatic sense. I walked away intact. One night, unpacking the last box in my new apartment, I found a note I'd written to myself months earlier during my darkest week. Don't forget who you were before this tried to break you. I folded it carefully and placed it in a drawer, not as a reminder of pain, but as proof that I'd survived it. Because fallout isn't always destruction. Sometimes it's the clearing that lets you see exactly where you stand. I used to believe endings were loud. Confrontations, closure conversations, final words delivered with perfect clarity. That's not how this ended. It ended on a quiet morning in my new apartment, sunlight stretching across the floor like it belonged there. I made coffee, I checked my calendar, I got dressed for work without wondering who might interrupt my day or what version of myself I'd need to perform. Nothing dramatic happened, and that's how I knew I was free. I didn't forgive Clark in the way people expect. I didn't make peace with Kelly. I didn't find comfort in everything happens for a reason. What I found instead was something sturdier. Discernment. I learned that love doesn't ask you to shrink your needs to keep someone comfortable. That loyalty isn't proven by how much pain you can absorb in silence. And that being strong doesn't mean enduring betrayal. It means recognizing when endurance is being exploited. I learned that manipulation rarely announces itself as cruelty. It often arrives as concern, as familiarity, as someone who claims to understand you better than you understand yourself. And I learned that walking away isn't failure. It's authorship. I don't know where Clark or Kelly will end up. I don't track their lives. I don't need to. Their story diverged from mine the moment I chose honesty over illusion. What I do know is this. I survived a betrayal that tried to rewrite me as disposable. I rebuilt without needing revenge. And I chose myself, not because it was easy, but because it was necessary. If you're listening to this and standing at the edge of a truth you're afraid to acknowledge, hear me when I say this. You don't owe anyone access to you at the cost of your peace. You don't have to stay loyal to a version of love that hurts you. And you don't need permission to leave. Sometimes the bravest thing a woman can do is close the door quietly and build a life so full that the sound of it closing fades into nothing.